So today we have a really, really special guest with us. And today is the council's first educational webinar and hopefully the first of many. And what a way to kick it off than with our special guest that we have on here with us today, Mike LaCosta, CEO and founding partner of Ethnifax. Mike is a 40-year veteran of the consumer products industry, having worked with on development and growth of many brands, including Procter & Gamble and major wholesalers in the adult beverage industry. Mike has traveled extensively internationally, building relationships with suppliers and distributors and gaining a deep understanding of the multinational consumer in an effort to build and develop tools to achieve leadership in the cultural marketing arena. The council had the privilege to hear Mike present at the Latino Symposium in Dallas, and we were really impressed by the data that he was able to present. And that being said, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Felipe. Thank you. I appreciate that glowing introduction. Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you. And David, thank you too.
No, absolutely, Mike. We're really thrilled to have you here with today. And that being said, Mike, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the industry?
Sure. My background is consumer products. When I graduated from college, I went to work for Procter & Gamble, and I was in the bar soap division. So I was selling a lot of Ivory and Coast and Bounce and Downy and things like that a while back when I first got out of school. In the 80s, there were a lot of consumer products companies, Coca-Cola, RJ Reynolds, Nabisco, that were getting into the wine business. So E&J Gallo Winery recruited me to come into the wine business. And I went from selling soap to selling wine, which was a fun transition. I'd say I enjoyed that. But that was the beginning of my consumer products career in alcoholic beverages. And I spent the next 25 years working for Gallo and working for consumer and working for distributors in the alcoholic beverage business. And I always had responsibility for the southern tier of states, lived in California, lived in Florida, lived in Texas. So we always had a bit of a different consumer than the rest of the country. So I was very passionate about Latino consumers. And every iteration of a Hispanic marketing committee that we had, I was always head of that and just had a passion for that. My last position in that before we started Ethnifax, I was working for a major wholesaler called Glazers based in Dallas, Texas, which is now merged with Southern, the largest distributor in the alcoholic beverage business. But we did business with every alcoholic beverage supplier, Diageo, Anheuser-Busch, Gallo, Constellation, you name it, every one of them somewhere. And you would assume that all these big companies know everything there is to know about multicultural and Latino marketing, but they didn't. So we formed a company within a company, and I was on the board at the University of Houston's Wine and Spirits Management Institute and the Hilton College of Hospitality. So I got together with several professors that I knew that had PhDs in psychology and anthropology, and we formed a company within the alcoholic beverage business doing research for all these alcoholic beverage companies. And about 11 years ago, we bought the assets of that company and then took it into many other fields. And since that time, we've been doing work for Nielsen for over a decade now as their partner, writing all of what they call their DIS reports, diverse intelligence series. We do a lot of work for the CDC because the hard to reach populations, particularly maternal morbidity, is a multicultural issue. And we specialize in harder to reach populations, I would say. We do Hispanic pros for Home Depot, a lot of things like that, tougher to reach populations, and proud of that. That's what we do as Ethnifax, and that's how I got to where I am.
That's incredible. Well, first of all, going from soap to beverage, that's got to be an insane transition. But obviously, you saw a great opportunity there for you, Mike. As your years, working for all these major brands and companies, were you ever really shocked as to how these corporations still weren't aware of this growing market and the opportunity there that was there for them?
Well, everybody gives lip service to it, Felipe. They talk about, yes, it's such an important part of our business, but that's why, what I'm going to talk about a bit today is what I like to call the slap in the face presentation. So
Yeah.
when we go into a C-suite and we start talking to them about the opportunities, we start by saying, you think the Latino opportunity is big, but you know what? You're wrong, because it's bigger than you think it is. And we want to talk about the details, and we want to talk about why and not only the Latino opportunity, but the influence of Latinos and multiculturals on the mainstream. One of our partners wrote a book called The New Mainstream, and that was kind of prescient before its time, talking about how the tipping point. One of the things that we talk about is the tipping point in America, and based on census demographics, many people say the tipping point is going to happen in 2040, where we're going to be a multicultural majority. We actually had an event in Times Square in 2014 and had a ticker clock up in Times Square that ticked off what we think was the tipping point in America. And that happened 10 years ago, where the
Wow.
multicultural influence through what we call interethnic proximity index already happened. So that water's under the bridge. We're already multicultural majority in terms of influence in America. And that's what we want to talk about.
Yeah, I'd imagine some of the CEOs that eventually started contacting you said, "Hey, we understand how big this market is, but I'm sure once they saw your numbers and stats, they didn't they probably realized how much bigger it really was." To get us going here, Mike, what's one or two additional takeaways that you hope the audience can take from your presentation today?
Well, what I hope everybody's going to realize is obviously explosive growth. The explosive growth of the community, the fact that the tipping point has already happened. I mean, if you go to a market like Houston, Texas, and you look at three types of households that I'll talk about in a minute, households that are pure non-Hispanic white, everybody in that household is non-Hispanic white. Households that are pure multicultural, everybody in that household is the same race or ethnicity, and it's not non-Hispanic white. And then you look at the third group, blended households, where an Asian woman is married to an African American man, whatever it is. If you look at those blended households and you put them together with the multicultural households in Houston, Texas, about 75% of households are that, and only about 25% of households are non-Hispanic white. So, if we're talking about marketing to a group of people, we're not talking about a magical tipping point that's coming 20 years from now. We have to look at the reality of what's happening today, and we have to look at metrics that and ways to activate that and take advantage of this huge opportunity that's out there for everyone.
Yeah, I'm super excited, Mike, to for the audience and myself to see the presentation. So when you're ready, please, by all means.
Sure. Let me share my screen if I could, and I'll go through a few slides. And I invite everybody to participate. And Felipe, I know that you may ask questions as we go. If anybody else has questions, David, I think there's a way that they can raise their hands or whatever so that they can be admitted to talk, right?
Yeah. Yes, they can raise their hand and I'll call on them.
Okay, excellent, excellent. All right, let me move this to the side. All right, can everybody see this screen?
Yes.
All right, very good. All right, let me just kind of jump into this then. All right, very good. So quickly, I mentioned who is Ethnofax. This is a little bit about who we are. The one thing I would say is there's a web address there, www.ethnofax.com/Nielsen. If you go to that website, there are about 26 reports that we've been doing over the last 11 years or so. And many of them are about the Latino community. Many are about African Americans. Every year, we basically work with Nielsen to do an African American, an Asian, and a Latino report. We also have done LGBTQ reports, general multicultural reports. There's a lot of solid information there. Many of these reports are 50, 60 pages long on specific topics, but I think you'll find a lot of good there if you'd like. But we've done a lot of other work over the years with the groups that I've talked about as well. Let me start with this. This is an eye chart. I do not expect you to look at this, but I do want to mention that the census is in the Constitution of the United States. It is required that every 4 years that the United States do a census so that congressional districts can be set up. And we've been doing that since 1790. Thomas Jefferson was the first director of the census in 1790. And I'll give you a little fun fact here. We're very proud of this fact that in all that time since 1790, there has never been a person of color that was the director of the census. But a year and a half ago, Robert Santos from San Antonio, Texas, became the first person of color to be the director of the census. We're proud that Robert actually worked for one of the partners of Ethnifax for several years in Austin before he became the director of the census. So we have a great relationship with Robert, and we love to talk about what's happening with the census now. We're going to talk a lot about the new ways of gathering data, and there is a lot coming in the next few years in terms of how more granular data is going to be captured, which is going to be very helpful to marketing to the Latino community and others. But looking at this eye chart here, I want you to look down in the left-hand corner. That handwritten document is the first census of the United States that was done in 1790 by hand. There's the 13 colonies and how they were broken up. At that time, the only way that people were broken up was free white males, all other free persons, and slaves. That was it. That's how we looked at the United States. But look at how things have changed. We started picking up Native Americans in 1860. We started picking up Chinese, the green bar, in 1870, which has evolved into the AAPI community. Look at Latinos. Latinos were first captured as Mexicans in 1930. And then it wasn't until 1970 that we actually came up with the term Hispanic. And that term has been used for 54 years now to capture Hispanics. There's no other country in the world that uses the term Hispanics. We do, and that's how we capture it in the United States. And you can see how that's evolved. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that because one of the things that happened in 2020 is up here in the top right-hand corner, we started asking more questions to people who chose their race as white or black. And that has really changed what we know about the population. This little chart here on the far left shows in 2010, every one of you on this webinar probably answered these questions in 2020. You were asked the middle column actually, but in 2010, it was these two questions. Are you of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? Ethnicity question. What is this person's race? Race and ethnicity are two separate things. But if you were white or black, that's it. There was no other information captured. Then in 2020, we changed it. So you're first asked about Hispanic, Latino heritage, ethnicity, but we go much more deeply on the open ends. In 2010, we only captured 30 characters. In 2020, we captured 200 characters about who you were. And question 7, if you said white or black, open-end boxes opened up, and you could say much more about who you were. So what did that mean? It meant 2.5 years of hand counting the data from the census. So what we know about people is much, much richer and more granular. This data didn't actually get released until September 21st of last year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened and what we know since then. But look at what happened. If you said in 2010 that I am Mexican American, Indian, and Portuguese and African American, the only thing the census picked up is I am Mexican American, Indian, and that's it. We lost Portuguese, we lost African American, we lost anything else that you might have written. But we started capturing that in 2020. So, what happened because of that? Look at these population changes that happened. The people in the United States that said, I am just white alone. I am not Hispanic. I'm just white alone. That's all I am. That number actually went down by 8.6%. So that's a huge number. Almost 20 million people said, I am not just white alone anymore. So that's one of the reasons that I say, if you think that the multicultural opportunity was big because of the growth of Latinos and multiculturals, it's actually much bigger because almost 20 million people had a choice to say, I'm not just non-Hispanic and white anymore. And look down here at the bottom and the numbers for some other race and 2 or more races. 28 million people more said I am some other race, and 24 million people more said I am 2 or more races. So we're talking about over 50 million people that said I am something else than what I said 10 years ago. Huge number. If you look at ethnicity, if you look at Latinos specifically, they were responsible for over half the growth of America from 2010 to 2021. So 12 million Latinos, new Latinos, grew in America versus only 11 million non-Hispanic. So at that point, the population of America went from 16% Hispanic to about 19% Hispanic and is continuing to grow. If we look at it, these are actually census projections between now and 2060. And what you can see in the little man here graphic, the percentages represent the contribution to growth. So between now and between 2020 and 2060, 68% of the growth in America, 68% of the growth in America will be Latino. Now, 22% will be African American, 23% Asian, 13% other. But look at the light blue line below the bar. This is the important fact. I'm talking about the opportunity is bigger than you think. Not only are these groups, the traditional multicultural groups, growing faster, but non-Hispanic whites are aging, right? They're aging. They're not having kids. So they're not growing as fast because they're not having kids. So what's happening is between now and 2060, the non-Hispanic white population in America will be down 27%. Contribution will be down 27%. So that's why one of the reasons that we say the opportunity is much bigger than you think it is. Let's look at how these changes affected the identity of Latinos. We're talking about Latinos and franchises, many of which serve the Latino community. Let's look at how Latinos identify themselves with these new numbers that were released on September 21st of last year. And the census, when they released data for over 1,500 detailed race and ethnicity groups, many of which were Native American tribes. And it's fascinating when you look at the Native American tribes because there is no hierarchy. You're not, a lot of people think of Cherokee or Apache or whatever, but many of these tribes are 50 people in Alaska that identified as a group of people. And that was the tribe at the time. So, there was not a central government or anything like that in America before Europeans came here. So the census is now picking up all that identity. But look at what happened specifically to Hispanics. If you look at 2010 on the far right here, 81.6% of Hispanics said, I am just one race, and 47% of them said, I am just white alone. That's it. I wasn't really given another choice. But with the new choices in 2020, that number that said I am just one race went from 81 to 57%. And the group that said I am just white alone and Hispanic, that number went from 47% to only 17% of Latinos. Huge difference, huge difference. So culture is about fusion, and fusion is now being measured by the census. And metrics to help activate that and ways to do that are what Ethnifacts helps companies do, is to better understand that. So let's look at some details about the Latino population in the United States. This is very important. Two biggest population states in the country, California and Texas, both now have more Latinos than any other ethnic or racial group. That was big news in 2021 when that happened a couple of years ago in Texas, where the Latino population passed the non-Hispanic white. California has been that way for several years. So they're kind of a harbinger of what's happening in America. I'm going to give you a few stats which you may find interesting. There's now 8 Hispanic countries of origin that have over 1 million people in the United States. Number one up there is Mexican, Guatemalan, Honduran, Salvadoran, Colombian, Cuban, Dominican, and Puerto Rican all have over 1 million people. This number may surprise somebody. Look at Venezuelan. Venezuelan increased by 181% from 2010 to 2020. Now, a lot of you that know the political situation in Venezuela may understand why people came to the United States from Venezuela over the last 10, 12 years to basically have capitalism and the ability to do business, which is what all of you on this webinar are doing, is franchising businesses and catering to customers. But Venezuelans are the largest growth group in the United States of any Latino populations. This is the top 3 states for these 8 countries that have over 1 million people. So very interesting to look at the first, the second, and the third population for each country of origin. California and Texas are number 1 for Mexican Americans. Florida and New York are number 1 and 2 for Puerto Rican. California and Texas for Salvadoran. This one may surprise some people. Florida and Texas. Texas is number 2 for Cuban population in the United States. Dominican, New York, and New Jersey. Felipe, where you are, number 2 for the Dominican population. Guatemalan, California, and Florida, Colombian, Florida, and New York, and Honduran. Texas is number one and Florida number two. So interesting, if your business is maybe particularly appealing to people from different countries of origin to know these facts.
And Mike, can I ask you a
Yeah,
quick question there?
sure, Felipe.
Seeing the states, right, and obviously we know about the California, we know about New York, we know about Texas. Do you foresee, from your experience and now how the numbers are rising, do you see the other states starting to grow as well, or is it more just going to continue to grow within these states, or eventually, of course, just based off your expertise and the numbers, will we start to see other states in the rise as well?
Absolutely, Felipe. This chart is just raw numbers. I didn't share a chart. If I was to show you a chart on growth percentages, none of these states would show up. The Latino community, as we all know, goes where the jobs are. So if you look at the last 10 years, states like North Dakota, because of all the fracking that's being done and the drilling, has had an explosion in Latino population. They're probably the fastest growth state in the country. So wherever the jobs are is where the Latino community goes. Northwest corner of Georgia has exploded due to the carpet business and textiles. So different parts of the country. I actually did something for Nielsen yesterday where we looked at 11 television markets, and Washington, D.C. is one of the fastest growth Latino markets in the country in the last 10 years because there's jobs there and people are going there. So yeah, to your point, growth is happening not just in these states, which typically are kind of the states around the outside of the country. It's happening in the interior wherever the jobs are.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so continuing that, let's look at consumerism. So yeah, numbers are great. There's a lot of people, but there's also something that we like to call years of effective buying power, because not only are Latinos younger, but based on CDC numbers, they live longer, as do Asian Americans than non-Hispanic whites. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of years about life expectancy since COVID happened. But there were some anomalies that happened there. Things are beginning to get back toward the norm pre-COVID. And what you're seeing is these numbers, which are that the average Latino lives to almost 80 years old, 77.7. So a year and a half longer than a non-Hispanic white. And you can see that an Asian American lives much longer. Then you look at the median age of the population and see the youth of Latinos versus 43, 30 basically versus 43 for non-Hispanic whites. And if you subtract that and say, okay, if I get a Latino consumer loyal to my business, if I can get them to start buying my product, how many years will they keep doing that? And the numbers are staggering that the average Latino will buy your product if they get loyal to it for 47 years versus 33 years for a non-Hispanic white. So many times, I talk about the slap in the face presentation earlier when we're talking to a C-suite. We're not just talking about what can happen today. We're talking about the ROI over the life of that consumer. And it's 15 years longer or 14 years longer for a Latino consumer than a non-Hispanic white, which is very important. I had mentioned influence earlier, so I'm going to quickly cover this, that the three ways that I talked about defining households in America: unblended non-Hispanic white, everybody is that; unblended multicultural, everybody is that; and then blended, fastest growth being blended. If you look at households in America, you can see 41% of the households are either unblended or unblended multicultural or blended. But if you look at people, with the population being younger, more kids, et cetera, 47% of America lives in either unblended multicultural or blended. But let's look at that by generation. And what we see is the older you are, the less that's likely to happen. The younger you are, the more likely you are to live in one of these blended households or unblended multicultural. And the important thing for us and for you as business owners is that 53% of America, down here at the bottom, 53% of America under the age of 50 already today, not at some magical tipping point 20 years from now, already today lives in either a blended household or a pure multicultural household. So who should we be thinking about when we think about serving our customers and selling products? Obviously, it's that unblended, multicultural, unblended population and the influence on the non-Hispanic white population. I'm going to show you a few more numbers about consumerism with Latinos that I think will blow you away. This number to me is just hard to believe that these are Bureau of Labor Statistics projections and numbers. And we look at the growth of new jobs, labor force growth. And what we see is between 2010 and 2020, 91%. Let me repeat that number. 91% of the new jobs, the labor force growth in America was Hispanic. 91%. And is now projected to be almost 80% of that growth over the next 10 years. Why? Because the most common age for Latinos in America, not the average, not the median, the most common age for Latinos is 19, just getting into the workforce. The most common age for non-Hispanic whites, 61. And the average American is now retiring at 62 to 65. So, where is this growth coming from? Who's going to pay the Social Security of these 61-year-old non-Hispanic whites? It's the Latino person coming into the business world.
Yeah. Mike, can I jump in here once again?
Sure.
Those numbers are staggering. And, when we talk about impact on business decision, ethnic facts, when you present this research, right, how does that influence the strategic decisions and marketing efforts of your clients when they see these numbers that ethnic facts provides to them?
Well, Felipe, there's a lot of examples of that with business that we've done, since we started the company. One of my best examples that I could talk about is AT&T, where AT&T had a research proposal, an RFP, and they came to us and they said, everything we've ever done has been in Spanish, Latinos, or general market advertising. And we think we're missing something. And we said, yeah, we think you're right. So, we did a proposal for them and we did a survey, back 6 or 7 years ago, where we looked at their business and looked at awareness and intent to buy cell phones and do things with AT&T, and found that for Spanish speaking Latinos, awareness and intent were off the charts. They were doing great because they had a targeted Spanish language ad. But for English speaking Latinos, particularly those born in the United States, which is by far the fastest growing population, they were way below water. They weren't getting it. There was nothing special in that general market advertising that made people say, that's for me. So we actually have coined a term at Ethnofax, trademarked a term that we call ambicultural. It's like being ambidextrous. You are 100% fluent in more than one culture and language. And I would venture to say that is probably the majority of people on this call today, is that you can function equally well with a group of Latinos, and then the next night you can function equally well with a group of gringos, if that's who it is, that you have that ability to function in more than one world. So we helped AT&T after that survey develop a campaign called #BetweenTwoWorlds. And you can Google it if you'd like, #BetweenTwoWorlds. And there was a company named Vice, a creative agency that did a lot of videos that were about these conflicted ambicultural Latinos who spoke English and Spanish. And it won a lot of awards. And we tracked the results of that for 2 years in 22 states. And that group of Latinos who were ambicultural that lived in both worlds, it lit up. All of a sudden, AT&T was reaching these people because there was a nugget in the advertising that was just for me. There's a director, Robert Rodriguez, out of Austin, who many of you may know from Machete and various other things, Spy Kids that he's done over the years. He loves to say that when I make a movie, I want to entertain the general public, but I want to have a nugget that's special for the target community that I'm trying to go after. And what I would say for all of you that are doing advertising, that are doing marketing, that are trying to reach the Latino community, or if it's the African American community, the Asian community, whatever it is, have a nugget in what you're doing. Make them understand that you get their life. We worked with Lowe's a few years ago on trying to help them go after people that lived in both worlds, because they were many of their consumers, particularly the DIY consumers, that these people had busy lives, but they lived in two worlds. So appeal to that, and that can grow your business astronomically. So There's a
Yeah.
long answer to your question, Felipe, but I think that
No,
that's how
all
we treat it.
all incredible examples. Thank you so much, Mike.
Sure, absolutely. So what's happening? This Latino community. Look at real consumption growth. Latinos versus the rest of the U or versus the U.S. And this is consumption growth from 2010 to 2021, 57% versus 23. So more than double Latino consumption during that time. Non-Latino was only 19%. So yes, much more than double. If you look at this real wage and salary income growth, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody when we looked at new job growth. 44% of that was Latino, only 18% was non-Latino. Now, what I will say is there are opportunities in the Latino community to get better paying jobs. Education is helping. We looked at 91% of the new labor force growth, but only 44% of the actual income growth. So there's still opportunities for better jobs, for more education. And that's what the community as a whole is working toward and needs to continue to be working toward. If we look at the GDP, if we look at the gross domestic product of US Latinos, they would be by themselves the fifth largest country in the world. And if you look at the growth of that GDP, it would only be behind China and India over the last 10 years, 11 years. So obviously, slap in the face that I mentioned in the beginning. How do you ignore these numbers? How do you say, yeah, that's a nice niche market and maybe I can do that. Maybe I can dedicate 6% of my budget to it. No, it's much bigger than that. Much, much bigger than that. Latinos are entrepreneurs. That's why I'm saying this with this group on here from the International Franchise Association. You are the leaders in terms of forming new businesses. This is something called the Kaufman Indicators of Entrepreneurship. It's a academic measurement that's been going on for years, since 1996. But you read this basically as 500 out of every 100,000 Hispanic adults created a new business each month. Get that right. A new business each month. So the green line here is Latinos, and you can look at new businesses started by Latinos. And that green line since 2001 has led every other population, every other race, ethnicity. The interesting thing is you can see what happens when different events happen in America. Look at the financial crisis of 2008. Look at all the new businesses, particularly with Latinos on the green line, that were started in 2009 to 2010. So coming out of a financial crisis, what happened? People started new businesses. That went down a bit. The pandemic happened in 2020. Look at the dip, but look at the new businesses that are being created. And Latinos are the leader since the pandemic happened. So, you're out there, you're forming new businesses, you're starting franchises. Go get them. The business
Mike,
investment. Yeah.
Mike, this
Go
is
ahead.
David. We have a question from the audience. Valeria, are you able to unmute?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. Mike, this is great. I'm now writing my second book, do a lot of research on the Latino community. I'm looking for this type of research. I've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years. I do speaking, consulting, and I have to say this presentation is the best that I have seen. So really, really great numbers. And I'm wondering here, because this really builds the case on why you should go after the Latino consumer. This is very clear. But then on the other side, and this is the work that I do, when you go to ERGs and we're talking human development, talent development, the case is not there yet. So the budgets are not there. And I get it. The companies need to sell first and gain market share. And that's an easier sell. But do you have any suggestion on how we can work with these companies to show them that it makes sense to invest in your ERGs? It makes sense to invest in developing your Latino talent because we have the knowledge actually on how to tap into that market. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestion, because I have seen that kind of lag or delay in investing in us from these organizations.
No, Valerie, no question about that. And that is what we face all the time, and why I mentioned what I like to call the slap in the face presentation at the beginning, because too many times they look at just numbers. And yes, 19% of America is a big number. But then they look at income and they look at degrees and things like that. And they go, well, the average income is lower. The household wealth is a little bit lower. So, yeah, I'm not that interested in that, because if I invest in someone who makes more money, I'm probably going to get more business or more result. So that's where I like to talk about the potential. That to us, one of those things that I mentioned earlier, the years of effective buying power starts to talk about the ROI. Yes, the average income may be a little bit less right now, but it's growing, by far the fastest growth of anyone. The educational numbers are growing faster than anyone. The job creation, the household creation, all the numbers that I talked about, the new labor force growth are all vastly bigger. I mean, you can't turn down 91% of your new employees are Latino. It's just, are you getting them in your company? But that's where we talk about potential and the growth, the ROI and the growth, that don't just look at percentage of population and household income. That is the two things that get companies in trouble. We do a lot of work with Nielsen that I mentioned, and we've inserted a lot of our segmentation models into some of the Nielsen home scan panels and things like that. And when you look at the potential and the growth, the numbers are off the charts. If you were to eliminate the Latino portion of business growth for many, many consumer products, they would actually be down. If you didn't have Latino growth, they would already be losing business. And so that is kind of a way to look at it, Valerie, is how do you break out the Hispanic component of the business? And if you can do that, that's a hard thing to measure. And Nielsen numbers can help with that. IRI numbers can help with that. Ethnifex can help you with that if you'd like to talk to us. But if you can break down that Latino component and go, whoa, I would actually be losing business today if I didn't have this Latino growth, then it's the slap in the face and they go, wow, okay, I need to pay attention. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yes, with my own clients, I've noticed that slap in the face comes from getting them to see that they are missing out on a big piece of the pie, right? But then I also noticed, yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, yeah, I also noticed that when it comes to developing their own Latino talent, they do not put the same level of interest or investment behind workforce development or like talent development, human development.
Right.
In my opinion, what I have seen out there, yeah.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and that is the challenge. I serve on several boards. One is the Latino Hotel Association, and the one that I work with a lot is Yum Brands, which is Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, what they call their LIFT Council, Leading Inclusion for Today and Tomorrow. And let's be honest here. The elephant in the room is there has been a lot of DEI backlash in the last year and a half. Last summer, there were 13 states attorneys general that sent an open letter to the CEOs of the top 100 Fortune 100 companies that said, we're watching you on diversity, that, the university ruling was made last year. If you do anything that could be discriminatory against any group of people, we're going to come after you. And that has been a challenge for companies, particularly for ERGs and what you're working with, Valeria. And, many companies have actually taken the name diversity out of DEI. It's now called EIB in many, many companies, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because it's not saying just diverse populations, it's saying anyone can belong. So it is a challenge. There was a lot about Jamie Dimon and what he came out and discussed this week in terms of how they are doing it. And companies that are all in on this are doing it correctly. You have to be aware that there can be backlash on diversity outreach, but you cannot ignore it because of these numbers. And that is, where we like to come in with what we call the slap in the face presentation, that this is not a nice to have, it's an absolute must. If you're not doing it, you could be a dying business already. And that goes in terms of who runs your company, who manages your company, who your employees are they mirroring the community that you serve? And that's how we do it, Valerie. And I'd love to talk further if we can help in any way.
Thank you. This is great. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. So I just have a couple more slides and then we can open discussion. But if you look at business investment and you look at the GDP elements of the economy, and you see the middle column is the Latino economy, the far right column is the non-Latino economy. So economy. So business investment by Latinos over that 11-year period was up 7.6 versus only 3.2 for the non-Latino economy. So, who's investing in businesses, which is what you on this call do. Look at personal consumption, which is almost triple. Residential investment, bigger. My wife happens to be a real estate broker. Who is forming these new households? They're younger, they're starting in the workforce. That's who's buying houses largely. Exports of goods and services. Look at the numbers for Latino versus non. Imports, government expenditures. So basically, what we're saying is that business investment, what all of you on this call are doing, is much, much bigger for Latinos, and you're proving it. Now, final slide. And I love this one. This is the drivers of wealth. So if you look at the net worth of Latinos as a whole, and you look at net worth of other populations, there are three things that affect your net worth more than anything else. It's owning a home, it's owning a business, and it's the other financial assets that you have. And if you look at the self-employed, which is what those of you on the call and the Franchise Association are probably doing, is owning your own business. That 174,000 number for Latinos is higher than anything else. You could own a home, your average net worth would be 169. You could have great financial assets, your average net worth would be 122. But if you own a business, if you're self-employed, your net worth is the highest of any of those three things. And look at the W-2 worker with a net worth of 35,000 versus self-employed with a net worth of 175,000. So thank you for this opportunity today to talk to you. Thank you for everything that you're doing to build your businesses and build the wealth in the community. You people who are business owners are really the people that are advancing the Latino community more than anybody else. And we appreciate that. And I am now going to stop screen sharing. And Felipe, let's take any questions or anything else you want to talk about.
For sure. Before I open it up to everyone, Mike, just incredible. I remember some of these information and figures that you presented in Latino, but it's drastically changed, and it's only been, I think, a little bit over a year. And I see some of these data has already changed, and that's why the council thought it was, for our first educational webinar, what better than to have you? So we just really want to thank you for your time. I did have one more question for myself before we open it up. Are there any educational or awareness programs that Ethnifax offers to help clients, better understand the multicultural and cross-cultural dynamics?
Yeah, what I would say is, we do a lot of speaking engagements. We work with a group called We Are All Human, which many of you may have heard of. Claudia Romo Edelman leads that. And they have a function at the United Nations every year. And we were lucky enough to, we're now doing research for them every year for a study called the Hispanic Sentiment Study. We will be presenting that and are presenting that every year at the United Nations. That was a lot of fun. We had that conference 2 days before the vote at the Security Council on what was happening in Gaza. So that was quite a time back in December when we spoke at the United Nations. So we do that. One of the things that we do as Ethnifax, and this is probably the one thing that I would say is the easiest way to get information and dip your toe in the water. We do a syndicated study twice a year called PICAT, the Personality Intercultural Affinity Tracker. Those are the two pillars of our company: is intercultural affinity and personality. And we put both of those things into a study that we do twice a year with a nationally representative, statistically significant sample, which oversamples Latinos and other racial ethnic groups. And you can get information about your company. Talk to us about that. We do the spring version of that, has a lot of proprietary space. So we work with people, from Northwestern Mutual in insurance to Major League Baseball, to all kinds of people in understanding how people react in the different segmentation models we do. So it's a way to apply what we've talked about today and a lot that we haven't talked about today to your business, to what you want to know. And then in the fall and the summer, we do a longitudinal survey. So for 7 years, we've been tracking admired brands, disadmired brands, all kinds of topics. For one alcoholic beverage company. We track the effects of marijuana on alcoholic beverages, which was fascinating, and many, many other things. So yes, to answer your question, there's a lot that we can do and a lot of vehicles that we can do that are fairly cost effective, without doing custom research.
Amazing. And that being said, I'm going to pass it over to David. It looks like we have a good amount of questions. We have roughly a little bit less than 12 minutes to do so. So David, if you want to go ahead and take it from here and let a couple people ask questions.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So I'm receiving notifications about everybody raising their hand. So I'll just go in that order, and then I'll also get to the chat if we have enough time. So first on my screen, I see Alex.
I think you're on mute, Alex.
Yeah, Alex, we can't hear you. Oh, okay. Alex, I'll come back to you. Next up, I see Marco.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful presentation, Mike. Very informative. I just had a couple of detailed questions. One, can we have a copy of these slides? Two, wanted to see a breakdown, or if you had a breakdown of women-owned, of franchise and non-franchise. And I don't want to steal Alberto's thunder on that one, but there's another question that mine ties to. Wanted to kind of get your thoughts if you have that information.
We do, and actually Latinas are kicking ass. So yes, there are some great numbers on female-owned Latino businesses that we can share if you'd like to talk about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, I would say, reach out for me. David, I don't know the best way to do that. Hopefully you can send out my contact information, or Felipe, and please ask those questions. Be happy to talk about some other numbers. We didn't have that long to talk today, so
no worries.
There's a lot more we can talk about.
Perfect. Awesome. Sounds wonderful. Thank you, Mike.
Sure.
Moving back, Alex, are you there now? Or can we hear you now?
I think his connection is not strong, so it's not coming in.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe you can write it in the chat, Alex, if you'd like.
Next up, Carlos.
Hi, thank you so much. Mike, great presentation. So happy I was able to join. My question is in regards of the opportunity that exists with the Hispanic market in general. In my company personally, we have an issue of like, where do we go after the chicken or the egg? What do I mean by that? We know this is a growing population. We know there's opportunity, but the investment required to quote unquote go after them correctly is sometimes too great of an initial investment for a lot of companies. What I mean by that is, you want to start servicing company or clients that may speak Spanish. It's hiring the back office people to be able to support them in Spanish, giving them the correct collateral and all the translation costs that are coming.
Right.
That comes at an expense, and obviously some of these things take time. So what is your recommendation on trying to make a good enough valid argument to be like, okay, to go after this market, this is how we're going to have to service them correctly to make a good customer experience, but that may not come as fast as we all work for, larger corporate companies that need to see kind of that ROI almost instantly.
Right. And I love to talk about this, Carlos, because we use something we call the intercultural affinity model. And that's in that PICAT thing that I talked about, personality and intercultural affinity. What intercultural affinity is, it's a segmentation model that takes into account all consumers, including non-Hispanic whites. So if we can look at people that are ambicultural, fully functional in more than one culture on one side of the spectrum, all the way to 5 segments with monocultural on the other side, people that are totally isolated, people that may either reject or not be involved in diversity at all, the buckets tend to get bigger. So this works in talking to C-suites and marketing companies a lot of times is, okay, who is like this target person that I'm trying to find? If in fact your product means that it should be in Spanish, only, and very isolated consumer. That's very different than an ambicultural consumer, a Latino who's ambicultural that can function in both worlds. So depending on the product and depending on what you do, we would sit down and we would look at your product and who you're trying to reach and what the message might be that would affect these different people. But if you can appeal to an ambicultural consumer, the bucket gets bigger because there are Latinos, there are African Americans, there are Asians. We just did a thing for Nielsen on Asian Hispanics. There are non-Hispanic whites who may share a lot of the values and the things. So all of a sudden, that bucket that was this smaller percentage of the households just got bigger because I'm looking at other people that share values and interethnic proximity with that group of Latinos. And my ROI on that bigger bucket just made a difference. And I went, gosh, I'm getting more for this spend. And we look at it like a bullseye, that if you take a bullseye, the middle is ambicultural. The next is a group beyond that. The next is explorers. The next is another group. And the final group is monoculturals on the outside of the target. Don't waste your money on those big circles on the outside. Put your money on that target in the middle. And if you do great with that, expand to the next ring and then the next ring. And each time you're going to get a better ROI because you're not only appealing to that Latino customer, you're getting the people that are culturally adjacent and your money is going further. So that would be my answer. And love to talk to you further about the implementation of that.
Thank you. That was great.
Mike, I had one question in the chat about just the data. Do you know if the numbers are taking into account Puerto Rico as part of the United States or just a territory?
I love that question because we get that many times when I present. These numbers that I presented today are not just Puerto Rico. The census, if you're familiar with census data, they do the United States and then they do Puerto Rico as a separate number. So I can get you all these same numbers for Puerto Rico, but typically when the census reports numbers, they report Puerto Rico separately. It's just how they do it. So, not the best answer for how the census does business, but that is how they do business. And there are great numbers for Puerto Rico too on top of this.
So thank you. I believe that's all. Alex, I saw in the chat you said, based on the data, how can we start targeting this new market? Any thoughts there, Mike? Just, I guess, marketing strategies?
Yeah, I mean, obviously getting the attention of the C-suite is number one and getting the investment, but it comes down to actionable plans, it comes down to strategy and tactics. And there are a lot of proven strategy and tactics. And again, if you're a brand that I would say that, if you look at Telemundo versus Univision over the last 20 years, Univision has gone all in more on the traditional Spanish speaking consumer strictly, although they're now changing. They are going to do a Super Bowl broadcast for the first time in a couple of weeks. Telemundo has gone more in on English and Spanish speaking consumers. So there are some differences in the way things that have been done and can be done. So it depends on your product. It depends on what you're trying to do. But again, we'd love to discuss that with you. And there are many strategies that can be done. But it's about that. It's about strategies and tactics. Once the light bulb goes off in the C-suite and says, we have to pay attention to this and we have to do better.
Awesome. Let's see, one last one. Reading Diane's question, I don't want to leave anyone out. One of our franchisees was unhappy that marketing materials are in Spanish and English, but not Vietnamese based on her market. I get overwhelmed by many languages represented. Do you have any thoughts? And if we don't have time, that's okay.
Yeah, I go all the way back to we lived in California and my wife flunked her driver's test because the only manual she could get was in Vietnamese. And she didn't know all the special rules for California and driving. So the more languages you can make those materials available in, the better. I mean, she faced what a Vietnamese person would have faced if they could not have gotten the driver's manual in their language. So yes, we all get frustrated by that, but there are primary languages. We do a lot of Asian research, and there are 4 primary Asian languages that cover the vast majority of the Asian population. But obviously, if you get into Hmong and many, many other languages, that can be spoken, it gets tough. So you have to prioritize. I mean, many of you on here are small businesses and bigger businesses. You've got to prioritize who you're trying to reach. And that kind of is where that target comes in that I was talking about, and trying to expand. You can't be everything to everybody. That's a problem if you try to be, because you'll be overwhelmed and you'll fail. So you've got to strategize and you've got to target. And that's the kind of thing that we try to help companies do.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Felipe, any last words?
No, I just want to say, David, thank you once again to the IFA, yourself, for the support. Mike, thank you so much for your time. I know you're extremely busy doing other presentations to other major companies. Again, thank you so much. I'm sure you're going to be getting a lot of contacts in the next couple of days. But again, thank you so much. And we realize that the opportunity is there at hand. We just have to go after it. So, Mike, thank you so much.
Absolutely, Felipe and David, thank you very much. Loved it. And I see a lot of things that I can't keep up with right now in the chat. So if you'd like to reach me, David, and Felipe, can you send out the contact information?
Put your contact information already in the chat.
Yeah,
Okay,
I put it
great.
in the chat, and everybody will have a recording of this webinar available, and we'll post it on IFA's site, and we'll send it out to all of the registrants. So don't worry, you'll see the slides.
Absolutely. So thank you, everybody, for participating. Really appreciate it. Wish I could have talked one-on-one a little bit more, but would love to do that. So, be in touch, and thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.